The deed was signed on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I have memorized the notary stamp pressed into the lower left corner of that document. 9:14 in the morning, September 14th. That same week, my father stood before 43 relatives at a rented lake house in the Catskills and announced, in front of everyone, why I had no business sitting at the adult table. He did not yet know about the deed. No one did. That is the particular power of quiet people. They have already moved before anyone notices they were planning to. My name is Renata. I am an estate planning attorney with 14 years of practice. My entire career has been built around helping families divide what the dead leave behind. I can tell you from professional experience that no document is more truthful than a will, and no moment more revealing than the reading of one. What people believe they were owed tells you everything about what they thought they deserved. This story is about a house appraised at $2.5 million, a grandfather who spoke carefully and planned everything, and a father who spent his entire life mistaking silence for surrender. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and families discover that assumptions have consequences. If stories about dignity, documentation, and accountability are your kind of content, leave a comment below and subscribe. There are people in this community who will know exactly what you are about to hear. I became an estate planning attorney because of my grandfather, though not because he pushed me toward the profession. Grandpa Lev did not push. He suggested. He demonstrated. He handed me a newspaper clipping about a woman who lost her home because her name had never appeared on the deed. And he said in his careful, accented English, "Renata, paper is permanent. People are not." He had arrived in this country with $400 and a brother who died before his 40th birthday. He built a landscaping company from a single borrowed truck. He purchased the house on Sycamore Ridge in 1979 for $87,000. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, 2 acres. He maintained himself until he was 81 years old. By the time I entered law school, comparable properties in that neighborhood were selling for over $2 million. By the time this story concludes, the appraisal would read $2.47 million. Grandpa Lev was precise about money in the way that immigrants often are, when money was once the only barrier between them and catastrophe. He kept his own handwritten ledgers. He could recall the cost of every significant purchase he had ever made. He read contracts before signing them. He filed every receipt in a shoebox labeled by year. I learned these habits by watching him. My father Daniel is his son. My uncle Marcus is also his son. My brother Tyler is Daniel's son, which makes him Grandpa Lev's grandson. These relationships will matter before this story ends. Growing up, our family operated on an unspoken but perfectly legible arithmetic. Daniel was the favored one, louder, more visible, more present. He called Grandpa Lev every Sunday without exception, occupied the seat at his right hand at every holiday, and volunteered opinions on everything the old man owned. He was also, quietly, not particularly capable with money. 3 failed restaurant ventures, a boat purchased beyond his means and sold at a loss, a house in Scottsdale that entered short sale in 2011. But he showed up. He performed loyalty in the currency the family recognized, volume and visibility. I showed up differently. I sent money without being asked. I reviewed Grandpa's lease agreements when he rented the back studio apartment on the property. I drove 3 hours to Sycamore Ridge every February to help him file his taxes. I sat with him in the hospital in 2019 during his cardiac event and sat with the cardiologist afterward, filling a legal pad with notes while my father sent a card that read, "Thinking of you." No one called what I did loyalty. They called it Renata being Renata. I never called it anything. I simply did it. The Henderson family reunion takes place every August at a rented lake house in the Catskills. 40-something people, 3 generations, a rental that runs approximately $12,000 per year. My father has organized the event since 2015, which everyone assumes means he pays for it, which he does not. The cost is divided by household, and mine had paid on time via Venmo every single year without announcement. That particular August, Tyler had just passed the bar exam. Tyler is 28 years old and the kind of person who received congratulations as his natural inheritance. He had been referring to the family's assets, a phrase he used without irony, since approximately age 22, as though they were being held in trust on his behalf. My father gave a toast. I do not have the exact words recorded anywhere, but I carry the memory of them somewhere near my sternum, so I will give you the approximate version. He raised his glass and spoke about legacy, about the Hendersons, about what it meant to carry a name. He spoke about Tyler and the bar exam and how this family had always taken care of its own. Then he looked directly at me across the table. I was seated at the far end next to my grandmother, who had been watching the entire scene with her water glass held very still. And he said, "Some of us built careers out of advising other people on how to handle their money. Tyler is actually going to do something with it." He laughed. Several people laughed. My Uncle Marcus laughed the hardest. My grandmother set her water glass down on the table with a small, precise click. I smiled. I picked up my phone, opened my notes application, and wrote down the date, the time, 7:48 p.m., and the approximate words. Because that is what I do. I document. The habit engaged before my feelings did. And by the time my feelings caught up, I had already created the file. Later that night, sitting in the room I shared with my husband, I opened my laptop and reread the draft estate documents Grandpa Lev had sent me 2 months earlier for my professional review. He had asked me to look them over as his attorney. He said it deliberately, not as my granddaughter, as my attorney. I read them that night with different eyes than I'd had in June. Grandpa Lev died on November 3rd. He was 87. He died in his own bed at Sycamore Ridge, which was what he had wanted. The hospice nurse present said he was calm. He had been calm his entire life. It was the thing about him that most people mistook for passivity. The estate attorney was a man named Gerald Park, a partner at a small firm in the county seat about 20 minutes from the house. Grandpa Lev had worked with Gerald for over a decade. Gerald called me 2 days after the funeral and asked me to come to his office, not to the reading scheduled for the family the following Saturday, but privately on Thursday. I drove up that morning. I sat across from Gerald in his office, surrounded by legal volumes and the smell of old paper, and he slid a document across the desk, a trust instrument, a revocable living trust executed September 14th of that year. Grandpa Lev had transferred title to the Sycamore Ridge property into the trust in September. The trust named one beneficiary for the real property, me. Not my father, not Tyler. Me, Renata, listed by my full legal name, described in a single phrase I will not reproduce in full, but which translated to the one who read the documents. He had written a letter to Gerald and handed it to me in a sealed envelope. I placed it in my bag without opening it. I was not ready to read it in front of anyone. The second document Gerald showed me was a promissory note dated 2009. My father had borrowed $340,000 from Grandpa Lev during the restaurant collapse. The note came with a repayment schedule. It had never been repaid. With compounded interest, the current balance was $412,000. My Uncle Marcus had a similar note. $180,000 borrowed in 2014, also never repaid. Gerald looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Your grandfather wanted you to understand the complete picture before Saturday. I read everything 3 times. I drove home. I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours without turning on the lights." My grandfather had not been passive. He had been patient. There was a difference that my family had spent decades failing to understand. The family arrived at Gerald's office on Saturday, the way people arrive at a birthday party where they expect to receive gifts. My father wore a blazer. Tyler wore a tie. My Uncle Marcus brought his girlfriend, who was named in no document and had no legal standing to be present, but no one said anything. They had been talking. I knew this because my cousin Priya, Marcus's daughter, the only person at the Henderson reunion who had not laughed, texted me the Thursday before to report that her father and mine had been on the phone for 3 consecutive evenings, that Tyler had already contacted a real estate agent about the Sycamore Ridge property, and that the agent had pulled comparable sales. Tyler had mentioned to Priya that he planned to list it in the spring, once we sort out the paperwork. He used the word "we." I had smiled and picked up my phone. On the Thursday after Gerald's call, I phoned my own personal attorney and instructed her to prepare letters. Gerald opened the reading with an overview of the estate. The liquid assets, roughly $280,000, were distributed as Grandpa had specified. A portion to my grandmother, a portion split evenly among all grandchildren, a small bequest to the hospice organization. Standard, clean. No one in the room registered any concern. Then Gerald reached the real property. He read the trust instrument in full. He named the beneficiary. My father's face passed through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 4 seconds. First, confusion, then what I can only describe as arithmetic, a rapid recalculation of something. Then the expression people wear when they realize they have been sitting in a negotiation they believed was a conversation. "That cannot be right," my father said. He said it quietly, which surprised me. Gerald confirmed that it was right. My Uncle Marcus said Grandpa would have told us. Gerald said he had chosen not to. Tyler looked directly at me for the first time that morning. He said nothing. If you have ever watched someone who forgot you existed suddenly remember your name the moment an asset was in play, you already know where this is going. Stay with me through this next part. It is the part I have rehearsed approximately 300 times, and I want to get every word right. They did not wait long. My father called that evening. He did not open with condolences, technically already offered, though briefly. He opened with, "There has to be a mistake." I said, "Gerald is very precise." He said, "Your grandfather was not well toward the end." I said, "I was with him in September, Dad. He was lucid." I did not add, and he executed a trust while I was present with a notary at 9:14 in the morning. He said, "You work with estates. You know how to influence an elderly person." I let that sentence exist in the air for a moment. Then I said, "Do you have something specific you would like to allege?" He did not. Tyler called 2 days later. He took a different approach, warmer, conspiratorial, the tone of someone who assumed we were on the same side against a shared injustice. He spoke about what Grandpa would have wanted. He said the house belonged to the family. He said I was being selfish, that I was letting my career make me cold, that this wasn't who I was. I said, "Tell me what you think I owe you, Tyler. I'd like to hear you say the number out loud." He stopped. I said, "Write it down if you prefer. My address hasn't changed." My Uncle Marcus sent a text message at 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday. "This family made you who you are, and you're going to throw us away for a house." I took a screenshot. I filed it. The letters from my attorney arrived at my father's and uncle's addresses the following Monday. They were not threatening. They were informational, a summary of the outstanding balances, the accrued interest, and the available options for resolution. Clean and professional, the tone of someone reading a balance sheet aloud. My father called my mother, who called my aunt, who called my grandmother, who called me and said only, "Renata, be careful." Not careful meaning stop. Careful meaning don't let them see you move. I was careful. The call I had been expecting came on a Friday. My father said there was going to be a dinner, the whole family at Sycamore Ridge. He said it as though it were the most natural thing in the world, as though the house were still what it had always been, a place where the family gathered, where my grandfather cooked, and where everything was determined by whoever was loudest. I said I would be there. I arrived at Sycamore Ridge at 6 p.m. with a leather folder. My husband stayed home. This was not a night for witnesses on my side. I wanted no one to protect and no one to perform for. The dining room table was set for 11. My grandmother sat at the head. My father sat at the opposite end, my grandfather's seat, which he had never occupied before. I noticed. I sat down without saying anything about it. The dinner was almost pleasant, which is the most dangerous kind. Dishes were passed. My aunt asked about my husband. Priya caught my eye across the table and held it for a moment. She had known I was coming, and she had come anyway, and I understood exactly what that meant. My father waited until the plates were cleared. Then he stood. He thanked everyone for being there. He spoke about Grandpa Lev, the immigration story, the landscaping business, the house on Sycamore Ridge that had become the center of the family. He was not wrong about any of it. He was performing a version of grief that was simultaneously a legal argument, and he was performing it well. Had I not spent 14 years reading exactly this kind of performance in exactly these kinds of rooms, I might have been moved. He said, "Grandpa wanted this house to be a place for family. We all understand that, and we all understand that certain decisions were made toward the end. Decisions we have reason to believe do not reflect what he actually intended." He looked at me. "We feel the right thing is for Renata to acknowledge this, and for us to find a fair resolution together as a family." Tyler nodded. Marcus nodded. Several people around the table studied the tablecloth. My grandmother's hands were folded in her lap. I said, "May I say something?" My father said yes. He believed I was about to concede. I opened the leather folder. I said, "I want to begin with the trust instrument, because I think it is important for everyone in this room to understand what Grandpa actually signed and when." I placed the document on the table and slid it so that anyone who wished to look could see the notary stamp, September 14th, 9:14 a.m. He executed this 6 weeks after the Henderson Lake House reunion, following an independent review by Gerald Park, who had represented him for 11 years, and following a capacity evaluation conducted by his cardiologist, which is in the supporting documentation behind tab 2. The room was silent. The promissory notes are behind tab 3. I did not raise my voice. My father borrowed $340,000 in 2009. My uncle Marcus borrowed $180,000 in 2014. Neither debt has been repaid. With compounded interest calculated at the rate specified in the notes, which both of you signed and which are notarized, the combined outstanding balance is $592,000. My attorney's letters were informational. This is simply what the arithmetic produces. My father said, "Renata," I said, "I'm not finished." He stopped. Grandpa left a letter. I reached into the back of the folder. I'm not going to read all of it, but there is one line I want to share, because I believe it is the thesis of everything he built and every decision he made. I unfolded the letter. I read one sentence. "I gave to the ones who asked, and I left something for the one who showed up." No one said anything. My uncle Marcus said he had been manipulated. I said, "By whom? Gerald Park? His cardiologist? The notary? Which of these licensed professionals do you believe participated in the manipulation of an 87-year-old man?" He did not answer. My father shifted registers. His voice softened. He said, "This isn't you, Renata. You were raised to think about family." I said, "I am thinking about family. I am thinking about the family he built, the decisions he made about it, and the fact that those decisions are documented, witnessed, notarized, and legally valid." I paused. "If you wish to contest the trust, that is your right. Gerald can provide referrals to appropriate counsel. But I want you to understand that there is a capacity evaluation on file. There are 11 years of consistent estate planning documentation, and there are 2 promissory notes that would be submitted as counterclaims in any litigation." Tyler said, louder than he intended, "You cannot actually believe he wanted this." I placed one more document on the table. A photograph. Grandpa Lev and me sitting at this very table in September, the day he signed the trust. His hand on my shoulder, both of us facing the camera. Gerald Park had taken it. He suggested it, actually. He said it was good practice to document a signing in context. My grandfather was smiling. He was smiling like someone who had just finished something important. I said, "I think he wanted exactly this." Priya looked at the photograph and then looked down at the table. My father sat down, not dramatically, just the way people sit when the thing they were holding becomes too heavy to carry. I closed the folder. I stood up. I said, "I will be in touch regarding the promissory notes. Gerald has the contact information. I looked at my grandmother, whose hands were still folded in her lap, whose face was the face of someone watching something unfold that had been decided long before tonight. I said, "Grandma, dinner was beautiful. Thank you." And I left. I drove home in the dark with the radio off and my hands at 10 and 2. The promissory notes were settled 8 months later. My father paid $210,000, the original principal restructured under a payment plan my attorney drafted, which he accepted without negotiation. My uncle Marcus paid $140,000 on the same terms. The remaining balance of each debt was forgiven, not because I was obligated to forgive it, but because Grandpa Lev's letter, Sadki, which I had read in full and alone, sitting in my car in a parking lot on a Tuesday evening in November, had asked me to be generous where generosity was possible. I was. No contest was filed against the trust. Gerald had been thorough. The capacity evaluation had been thorough. My grandfather had been thorough. The house on Sycamore Ridge is mine. The appraised value at time of transfer was $2.47 million. I have not sold it. My father and I do not speak regularly. We speak at holidays briefly, with the particular politeness of people who have each seen the other's documents. He has not apologized. I have not requested it. My uncle Marcus has grown quieter. His daughter Priya calls me every few weeks. She is considering law school. I have given her reading lists. Tyler moved to Austin, where he passed the bar and works at a mid-sized firm doing commercial real estate. I heard this through Priya. I have nothing specific to say about Tyler. My grandmother lived at Sycamore Ridge until she moved to assisted living 2 years after Grandpa died. I spent that summer restoring the wraparound porch, some of the work by my own hands, not because I was skilled at it, but because he had been, and it seemed like the right way to inhabit the house. I found his ledger books in the back of the hall closet, labeled by year going back to 1974. They are on a shelf in my office. The settlement money, $350,000 recovered from the promissory notes, went into a scholarship fund. Grandpa Lev had come to this country at 19 years old with $400 and a brother. The scholarship supports first-generation college students in the county where he built his business. The first recipients were named this past spring. Gerald Park was on the selection committee. I keep the photograph from the trust signing on my desk, his hand on my shoulder, both of us facing the camera. Gerald took it at 9:22 a.m., 8 minutes after the document was signed. My grandfather is smiling. He knew. He knew the whole time. The thing about my family is that they were not villains. They were people who had constructed a comfortable story about what they were owed and had lived inside it so long they had forgotten it was a story. My father believed he had earned the house through visible loyalty, that showing up loudly was the same as showing up meaningfully. He believed, I think, that the people who move quietly through a family, who pay their share on time and review the contracts and sit with the cardiologist and take notes on a legal pad, are moving quietly because they have nothing of significance to say. He confused silence with surrender. My grandfather never made that mistake. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had been confusing the two for 38 years. What they learned in Gerald Park's office and what they learned at the dinner table at Sycamore Ridge is that the person who never raised her voice had been, all along, the most prepared one in the room. Not because of anything she had planned against them, simply because she had paid attention and she had kept the receipts, and the receipts told the truth. I did not take the house from my father. I inherited it from a man who decided, with full legal capacity and a notary and an attorney and a photograph taken 8 minutes afterward, that I had earned it. He made that decision alone, on his own schedule, on a Tuesday morning in September, and he signed his name, watched the notary press the stamp, and then asked Gerald to take a picture. Paper is permanent. People are not. He told me that when I was 12 years old. I have been paying attention ever since. If this story reminded you that the quietest person in the room is often the most prepared, take that with you And if you have ever been the one who showed up, paid attention, and was mocked for it anyway, your receipts are still valid. They do not expire. Drop a comment if someone in your life needed to hear this today. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one.